COVID vaccine turns out it's back in the news.
Republican Party leaders on the Space Coast are minutes away from officially calling on the governor and other state leaders to ban mRNA-based COVID vaccines immediately. I-Team Chief Investigator Mike Magnoli has more on what exactly is going on. Mike.
Good evening, everybody. Well, in their own words, the leaders of Brevard County's GOP say that they believe the vaccines are a biological weapon. As you say, this is the executive committee of the party in Brevard. They haven't hit send on this letter yet, but that vote coming up at 6:30, and I'm told it's very likely going to pass. If it does, they're asking state leadership to make it illegal to give or to take mRNA vaccines in Florida. In this 4-page letter, complete with footnotes, Brevard County Republicans cite sources which led them to a stunning conclusion. Here it is in their own words. Government agencies, media, and tech companies and other corporations have committed enormous fraud by claiming COVID-19 injections are safe and effective. Strong and credible evidence has recently been revealed that COVID-19 and COVID-19 injections are biological and technological weapons. If approved, this letter will be sent to Tallahassee at a time when a grand jury, requested by Governor DeSantis, is investigating those very same vaccines. That grand jury's job is to determine whether pharmaceutical giants who brought the mRNA vaccines to market broke any laws and should face charges. It's already illegal to require anyone to get the COVID vaccine in Florida, but if state leaders go along with Brevard's request, no one in Florida would be allowed to get those vaccines. Today, the federal government sent a very different letter to drug companies, calling on them to make the COVID vaccines cheaper and more accessible, anticipating an increase in demand come flu season. The Brevard County Republicans gathering right now. That vote is expected sometime during the 6 o'clock hour, but I can tell you there is major support for this going forward.
Well, as you can see, Florida Republicans aren't fooling around. The Brevard County Republican Executive Committee did indeed pass a resolution declaring the COVID-19 vaccine and the virus itself as a biological and technological weapon. The committee plans to send a letter to state lawmakers calling for a ban on the sale and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines throughout the state of Florida. The letter issued by the county Republicans claims that the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent vaccine campaign have been intentionally manipulated and misrepresented by a trifecta of forces, particularly the federal government, all legacy media outlets that, of course, receive tens of millions of dollars in Pfizer advertising, and big tech corporations that actively attempted to silence dissenting voices. The Republican committee even alluded to a potential violation of the Nuremberg Code, which governs medical experimentation on human subjects. Now, this vote comes on the heels of newly disclosed documents that reveal that Anthony Fauci did indeed know of the plausibility of the lab leak origin of the virus, all the while actively silencing any and all attempts to verify such a source. We now know that as early as January 31st, 2020, Fauci had received an email from the head of the nation's largest biomedical research facility warning Fauci that COVID was very possibly engineered, coming from a lab rather than from a so-called wet market. So the whole question of COVID's lab origin was front and center with Fauci and the NIH from the very beginning of the pandemic. But of course, given that the NIH funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan, there appears to have been very deliberate efforts to downplay the origins theory so as to cover up that funding. Moreover, there's now evidence, I kid you not, that the Biden administration broke the law by not properly reappointing Anthony Fauci and other top officials within the NIH. Congressional Republicans discovered that Fauci was apparently never officially reappointed to his post by the Biden administration and therefore operated without legal authority, all the while spending billions of dollars in implementing draconian national health policies. You can't make this stuff up. What Brevard County Republicans are really doing here is they're calling out the government for not just being wrong on so many of the points with regard to the pandemic, but also actively banning and blacklisting so many who dared to dissent from the official narrative and talking points. I mean, just think about something as simple as masks. Originally, the CDC rejected the notion of a mask mandate. But then Democrats and their lackeys in the legacy media politicize masks, accusing anyone of questioning them as anti-science conspiracy kooks. And so in April of 2020, the CDC reversed its original position and called for the masking of the entire population, including children as young as 2 years old. The mask mandate and the shutting down of schools are now all widely considered highly questionable and unnecessary measures that did far more harm than good, particularly with regard to the emotional and developmental health of children. Many countries opted not to close their schools, and they did not experience increases in COVID. And subsequently, they haven't experienced the alarming drops in testing scores that we're seeing today here in the States. And to top it all off, we now have a number of studies that have concluded that wearing masks made little to no difference in the spread of COVID. Now, of course, all of this is going to be debated for years. But the fact that we're even having a debate goes against what the government and the legacy media and big tech platforms originally attempted to do. They collectively attempted to silence any and all dissent from the original narrative, what we now know to be a fully fabricated narrative coming from Fauci and other NIH officials and the Democrats and big tech. So this bioweapon declaration from the Brevard County Republicans is really part of a much larger backlash, a blowback against what many perceive to be deliberately nefarious forces behind so much of what passed as official COVID policy and response. And it's not going to stop with bioweapons declarations. Of course, it will be mocked and ridiculed by the legacy media, such declarations and so on. But unbeknownst to them, those ridicules will only fuel further backlash. It does appear that the political fallout from so much of Fauci's foibles and fabrications is just beginning.